Welcome to Health Professional Radio. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Neal Howard. Our guest today is Dr. Robert Miller. He's director of Forbes Norris MDA ALS Research Center in California Pacific Medical Center in San Francisco, and he's joining us today to talk about ALS. Welcome to the program, Dr. Miller, and thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Neal.
Now, a bit of background about yourself. Other than Forbes Norris, what was it that led you to Forbes Norris? Have you always been interested in ALS?
No, actually, I came to San Francisco initially to work on all other nerve and muscle diseases, but ALS was all the patients with that condition were taken care of by my predecessor, Dr. Forbes Norris, and he did a wonderful job of it. He was an international leader in the field, but when he developed cancer and was dying from that disease, he asked me to take over for him, and that was about 25 years ago, and it has been, that was a major fork in the road in my career because ALS has played a huge role in all that I've done ever since.
Many people are aware of ALS, but it's known as a couple of other things as well.
Yes, it is. Probably the best known is Lou Gehrig's disease because the mighty first baseman for the Yankees developed this, and it took quite a while to establish a diagnosis. And meanwhile, he was in a major slump, and he was incredibly gracious about his battle with the disease, as is the case for so many of our patients. It also goes by the name of ALS, which stands for a very long technical term called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which refers to the part of the brain and spinal cord that are affected by the disease.
And motor neuron disease as well?
Yes, as a matter of fact, in Britain, they don't use the term ALS. They use the more generic term motor neuron disease because it is the motor neurons that degenerate in the brain and spinal cord and lead to the progressive weakness that is the hallmark of the disease. We don't use the motor neuron disease term quite as much in the U.S. We tend to use ALS, but the two are interchangeable on the international forum.
Let's discuss some of the symptoms that we might look for before a diagnosis.
Well, the most common presentation or first symptom is usually weakness of an arm or a leg. And about 75 or 80% of people will notice that the earliest symptom that they develop is either a withering of muscle or weakening of muscle in a hand or in a leg. And the other very important presentation, as it were, first symptom is alteration of speech and swallowing. The speech and swallowing nerves are in the part of the brain called the bulbar region. And if a person begins to have slurring of speech and difficulty pronouncing words and trouble with their swallowing, that may be the onset of difficulty that's in the bulbar region, and that constitutes about 20 or 25% of patients.
So how many people are suffering from Lou Gehrig's disease?
It's estimated in the United States that there are about 25,000 people fighting Lou Gehrig's disease, and there are about 5,000 new patients per year. Many people don't recognize that multiple sclerosis and ALS have an equal incidence. That is, the percentage of people who come down with each of those diseases is very similar. But sadly, with ALS, there's quite a limited lifespan. And with MS, people tend to live, for the most part, a long life. So there are many more people living with MS, but the two are about the same in terms of their frequency.
How long are we talking about, say, from the time of diagnosis?
Well, the standard umbrella would suggest 2 to 5 years for about 80% of patients with ALS. So it's definitely a life-shortening disease. 20% of people will beat the 5-year mark, and 10% of people will live longer than 10 years with a very slowly progressive form of the disease.
What about the differences in prevalence among men and women? Is it pretty even across the board, or is one gender more likely to contract it than the other?
Men are definitely more susceptible and in general tend to get it at a younger age and to have a more severe form. of the disease. We don't quite understand why women have some protection against developing the disease, but there does appear to be that difference.
And when you say the severe form, is it a progression of the earlier stages that turns into the severe form, or are there different forms and say there's a severity that remains constant throughout the life of the patient?
Well, that's a very interesting question. There are different forms of the disease. We used to think that it was all one disease. There are some people who have mainly the brain part involved, and that tends to be more slowly progressive. We call that the upper motor neuron. Other patients who have more of the loss of nerve and muscle function in the limbs, we tend to call that the lower motor neuron, where there tends to be a faster course. But there are subtypes of the disease where, for example, it might begin in the arms in man and progress very slowly and spread to other areas very slowly. And so there are different subtypes. And some are slowly progressive and some are more rapidly progressive. And we're still learning about how to identify these early and what genes predispose people to either slow progression, fast progression, arm onset, leg onset, and so forth.
That makes for a very varied symptom management regimen, would you say? I mean, there's no cure, so how difficult is it to manage based on some of the variables that you just mentioned?
Well, it is challenging, and we do not have a cure, but we do have a number of treatments that have really begun to ease the burden of ALS. So we have one drug that slows it down called riluzole, and that's been available for more than 20 years, and it does buy time, but not reverse or stop the progression. And just recently, the FDA approved a second drug called edaravone, which appears also to slow disease progression, and particularly in patients who are early in the course of the disease. And with respect to the symptom management, we have a number of treatments that are very important. And one of them is simply attending a multidisciplinary clinic with a team of physicians and therapists that are experts in every part of the disease to be able to give one-stop shopping to people who are battling ALS and give help with all of the many issues that a person has to face in struggling with ALS. I would say the most important single problem in ALS is the breathing. And we now have some treatments to help assist people in their breathing when their breathing muscles become weak. We have a breathing machine that can be used at night for assistance, and that prolongs life and improves comfort in sleeping and quality of life. And there are a number of treatments that are examining their effect on the breathing. One of them is tirasemtiv, a drug that is in phase 3 trials from a company called Cytokinetics. And in the next month or so, we will hear the results of that large phase 3 trial, which we hope will demonstrate an improved management of the airway and of the breathing muscles, which would make a huge difference for patients battling ALS.
And where can our listeners learn more about ALS?
The ALS Association website and the Muscular Dystrophy Association website both have large sections on ALS and a lot of very current information.
Dr. Miller, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming in and speaking with us today.
Pleasure was mine. Thank you.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard. Transcripts of the program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au and also at hpr.fm. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, listen in, and download at SoundCloud. And be sure and visit our affiliates page at hpr.fm.